Hello, I am Ramjee Chandran, and here we are together in episode 28 of the History of Bangalore. This is season 1, the early history, and that is everything leading up to the founding of the modern city by Kempe Gowda. In the last episode, we were at the death of Amogavarsha Nrupatunga, and that is roughly towards 900 AD, so we are yet a few clicks away from Kempe Gowda. The story so far. The Rashtrakutas had unseated the Vatapi Chalukyas, and then they built one of the biggest empires known to the history of India. The aggressive Govinda III had laid waste to every king that had crossed his path, and he controlled a territory from near the Ganga to Kanyakumari, and that included the western coast of India, a good swath of the middle country, not to mention a large part of the south. When he died, the throne passed on to his son Amogavarsha, and there started the decline of the empire. Now it is unfair to rush to the judgment that the young Amogavarsha Nrupatunga had simply allowed the empire to get fragmented. It's not as though he had been idle or complacent, but his entire troubled life had been spent defending his kingdom against attacks, many of them from immediate family, and for all that, being able to hold together the vastness of the empire put together by Govinda, he had done a stellar job. Still, parts of the kingdom were gone. For example, the loss of territory to the Vengi Chalukyas. And after Amogavarsha, the sun began to set on the great Rashtrakutas. Now, I will walk you through that sunset and what happened with them and their cohorts, the Gangas of Talakadu. But right after you allow me a moment to express my thanks to the Prestige Group who sponsor this podcast. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. So we are at the beginning of the 10th century, and this is perhaps the most pivotal century in the history of the Deccan. Everything changed. Now, for those of you who are here for the first time, or maybe some of you missed choice episodes, let me go over the events that led us here from the 4th century till the current time. The main players whom we have encountered so far, at least the ones that are relevant to us, were the Kadambas, the Vatapi Chalukyas, the Pallavas, the Pandyas, the Vengi Chalukyas, and the Rashtrakutas, loosely in that order of appearance. And then there were their feudatories, the Gangas, who are all important to us because they ruled over the Bangalore region, and then the Nolamba Pallavas of the general Tumakuru region, and the Banas who floated around the south seemingly without roots and always mercenary. Now, I do not mention the Cheras of Kerala because they were only infrequently significant to the political play of the larger region, but they always featured in the news as targets of acquisition and subjugation of the Pallavas, Pandyas, Vatapi Chalukyas, and the Rashtrakutas, and later the Cholas, as were the minor kingdoms that controlled the important western ports like Revati Dvipa or Goa, the Konkan ports, the Bombay region, right up to the ports in southern Gujarat. And finally, there were these other feudatories, the Gujarat Pratiharas, the Malwa, and other smaller kingdoms of the area bordering the Vindhyas and the Narmada, and they came into the reckoning of the Vatapi Chalukyas and the Rashtrakutas. All their histories of this huge cast of characters wove in and out of each other over the centuries and generations. And either by conquest or through alliances, matrimonial sometimes, they became players in the political history of the Deccan, and by proxy, that of the Ganga dynasty, and that bears directly on the history of Bangalore. Now, as we enter the 10th century, things had already changed irrevocably. In this episode, I will talk mainly about the end of two great empires of the south, the Pallavas and the Rashtrakutas. By the year 880 AD, the mighty Pallavas were finished as an empire. When Amogavarsha Nrupatunga was reaching the end of his reign, towards 880 that is, so was the Pallava king and coincidentally Amogavarsha's namesake Nrupatungavarman. Yes, there were two Nrupatungas ruling at the same time. But to be clear, the name is a title and it means King of Kings. One used the title as part of his royal name and the other used it in his royal name. And coincidentally, Amogavarsha Nrupatunga and Nrupatungavarman both likely died around the same year, 880 AD, or close. Remember, these were the salad days of the relationship between the Gangas and the Pallavas, and their centuries-old rivalry was now behind them. The Gangas, the Rashtrakutas, and the Pallavas had all been friends, even if uneasy friends. All three, historically rivals they had been, were all present at the coronation of Shivamara II. So who ended the Pallavas? It was the Cholas, and they were at the sunrise of their resurgence after an interregnum of about 600 years between 200 and 850 AD. After some hiccups, they would become unstoppable and go on to overrun all the kingdoms of the south. But more about the Cholas in an upcoming episode. In Kanchipuram, the ruling king was Nrupatungavarman, the son of a Rashtrakuta princess, Shanka. Now, Nrupatungavarman was the recognized ruler of the Pallavas, but in reality, he shared the responsibility with his older brother, Kampavarman. Now, there is a theory that their father, Nandivarman III, had split the administration of the kingdom in two, and each brother had his share. But, by evidence, they seemed to have run it together. Now, Kampa was married to a Ganga princess, inevitably named Ganga Mahadevi, and they had a son, Aparajitavarman. Now, it is possible that Kampa had appointed Aparajita as co-regent for his side of things. But these things often go sideways, and Nrupatungavarman and Kampavarman went to war. And before long, Aparajita joined this war against his uncle, Nrupatungavarman, and a major battle seemed unavoidable. In the lead up to this battle between uncle and nephew, Aparajita had gone on a rampage. He attacked a number of petty kingdoms, including the Balas and the Pandya king Varaguna II, and the inscriptions mentioned a Chola. This was probably Aditya I, who was ruling as the head of a small principality, Tanjavur, probably as a feudatory, but he was showing signs of independence. Aditya Chola lost this battle to Aparajita, but then he joined forces with Aparajita and joined the battle against Nrupatungavarman. And in this battle, Aparajita prevailed. As an aside, historian Dennis Hudson adds the interesting dimension of religion. He suggests that this sibling rivalry between Nrupatunga and Kampa were also motivated by Nrupatunga being of the Vaishnava Bhagavata Dharma and Kampa being of the Jaina faith, which was the principal faith of the Gangas and the Rashtrakutas. Now, we would do well to remember that back then, there was no separation of church and state, and the divisions between the sects of Hinduism and popular faiths like Jainism could be as much of a chasm as between, say, Hinduism and Islam. Pleased that he had won the battle, Aparajita, now as emperor of the Pallavas, made generous grants to Aditya Chola. But he had not won Aditya's heart nor mind, much less his subservience. And in the days that followed, Aparajita became suspicious of the growing ambitions of Aditya Chola and his son and eventual successor, Parantaka I. Finding his suspicions to be well-founded, in 890 or thereabouts, Aparajita attacked Aditya Chola. It was an ill-timed move or an ill-considered move, maybe both, and this one battle changed history. The finale to this battle, according to one source, came when Aditya Chola climbed onto the war-crazed elephant on which Aparajita was riding and slew him with the sword, the top of the elephant being an elevated stage for this gruesome spectacle for all soldiers to witness. This business of killing the king while he was on an elephant occurs frequently on inscriptions that describe battles during this period. Maybe it was just a matter of the imagination of the scribes of the day, but it does bring into question the logic of a king presenting himself as a highly visible target on the back of an elephant. Even in modern warfare, army personnel will tell you that when troops march through enemy territory, officers and soldiers often removed their rank insignias to make it harder for the enemy to distinguish ranks. This is done to prevent snipers from targeting senior officers, which could then leave the troops without leadership and cause confusion. Nevertheless, the result of the battle was that Aparajita Varma was killed by Aditya Chola. The Tiruvalangadu inscription of the Cholas describes this outcome in a somewhat tongue-in-cheek fashion. It mocks the Pallava name Aparajita, which means the unconquered. It reads, "Though he was in name Aparajita, Aditya took Aparajita's beloved country." And with the killing of Aparajita Varman, the mighty Pallava dynasty that had once ruled the Deccan, Lanka, and a good part of Tamilagam ceased to exist, never to be heard from again. It's time for that commercial break. When I come back, we move forward with the story of the end of the other mega kingdom of the Deccan, the Rashtrakutas. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hello again. The sudden disappearance of the Pallavas at the end of the 9th century was only one of a series of changes in the Deccan. As the 10th century began, the history of the Deccan got quite chaotic, and the events of the next 80 years or so only went to demonstrate the inevitability of cycles of the rise and fall of the empires. For instance, by the end of the first millennium, that's 1000 AD, we see the demise of the Pallavas and the Rashtrakutas and also the Gangas. Today, we were just through with the fall of the Pallavas, and now for the rest of this episode, I'll talk about the fall of the Rashtrakutas. In the 150 years between the founder Danti Durga in 735 to the death of Amogavarsha towards the end of the 9th century, the Rashtrakuta Empire had seen the succession of 6 illustrious kings, each committed, capable, and deeply intellectual. But after 900 AD, the remaining Rashtrakutas fell like 9 pins. That's not a cliche. Literally, there were 9 of them, starting with Krishna II, Amogavarsha's son. And maybe with the brief exception of Krishna III, none of these 9 kings expanded or in any material way changed the Rashtrakuta Empire in their time, the way that their ancestors had done. Now, it might be unfair to say that they caused the decline of the empire either, but I wouldn't waste too much time explaining the end of this dynasty because this empire, like most geographically limited kingdoms, had grown as much as it could. Given the obvious limitations of their ambitions, and I dare say ability, when placed on the spectrum of world conquerors, each of these kingdoms eventually became a target for the newly ambitious, typically a feudatory that sees an opportunity to take over the kingdom and maybe gets other feudatories and some palace officials to buy in. Now, because the Rashtrakuta kingdom had probably expanded to the extent it could, the balance of the ruling kings would have focused more on maintaining and protecting the existing kingdom with no chance of trying to expand it. In any case, in the wake of Amogavarsha's death, troubles started afresh. There were constant threats to the kingdom. And all Amogavarsha's successors could do was probably and literally hold the fort. But did that really happen? In the short span of 35 years, there were 5 kings: Krishna II, Indra III, Amogavarsha II, Govinda IV, and Amogavarsha III. Let's go over this. In the decade following Amogavarsha, with Krishna II on the throne, the Rashtrakutas and the Chalukyas of Vengi were fierce enemies. On the Vengi Chalukya throne was Vijayaditya III, who had reclaimed much of his kingdom from Amogavarsha I. Excited by some recent victories he had over the Pallavas and duly emboldened by this new strength, Vijayaditya turned his attention to the Nolambas and the Gangas, and both were allies and feudatories of the Rashtrakutas. And by doing this, the Vengi Chalukyas directly challenged Krishna. Krishna's sister Chandraballabe was married to the Ganga prince Butuga, and so the Gangas were close family and enjoyed his protection. Krishna saw that any attack on them or any other feudatory was a threat to his own sovereignty. Initially, Vijayaditya enjoyed some successes. He defeated the Nolamba army and killed their key generals. He then overran Gangavadi. He defeated Rachamalla and Butuga in battles at Remia and Gungur, and he forced them to flee and hide in hill forts. And then Vijayaditya launched an all-out attack on the northeastern Rashtrakuta front, and he captured and he burned Chandrakuta and Kiranapura, and this is right where Krishna II was stationed. Vijayaditya III was unstoppable, and soon everyone stopped trying to stop him. And things got better only when Vijayaditya died in 888 AD. And licking his wounds, Krishna II set about restructuring his army and getting things back in shape. Krishna II died in 914. Now, none of the succeeding kings were of great importance to the events of the country until around 935, when Krishna III ascended the throne. There was a spark in this Rashtrakuta, and he is quite easily the only king to have emulated the fire of his exemplary ancestors. And he was not without craft and ambition. For one thing, he got his brother-in-law, Butuga II, on the throne of the Gangas by helping him to overthrow his brother and the legitimate ruler of the Gangas, Rachamalla. And now, Krishna Rashtrakuta had Butuga Ganga by his side in all major battles, such as in one of Krishna's most significant campaigns, his war against the Cholas. And this was the famous Battle of Takkolam in 949 AD. Takkolam is a hamlet that exists even today, located about 25 kilometers straight north of Kanchipuram. Now, assisting the formidable Rashtrakutas and the Ganga armies were a ragtag bunch of local chieftains cobbled together from nearby districts. In the Chola corner was the son of Parantaka and grandson of Aditya Chola, the crown prince Rajaditya, and he was assisted by the Cheras from Kerala. Why this battle happened at all is unclear, but some believe that Krishna had been egged on by his feudatories and by Butuga, proposing that this, for various reasons, was the best time to attack. And, as it turned out, it was. The armies faced each other on the Battle of Takkolam, and it ended badly for the Chola Emperor Rajaditya, and he was killed. But exactly how was he killed? There are two versions of what happened. The larger Leiden plates, called Leiden because they are now in the Leiden Museum in the Netherlands, say that he was killed in the Battle of Takkolam when seated on top of an elephant. There it is again. He was a clear and available target, and an arrow fired by Krishna III, or maybe Butuga, had his heart split open. Some others say that Butuga rushed at Rajaditya's elephant, climbed the trunk, got on its head, and drove his sword into Rajaditya. That's a familiar story. But the Atakur inscription tells a different story, and that holds that the Ganga Butuga II hugged and treacherously killed Rajaditya Chola. Either way, die he did, and for this, Krishna III rewarded Butuga with the grant of great domains, including all of Banavasi and many other clusters of villages. The death of the crown prince Rajaditya first threw the battle into chaos, and then threw the entire kingdom into despair, and the newly reminted Chola dynasty was temporarily and badly fractured. So fractured that some historians prematurely rushed to express this moment as the end of the Cholas. But soon enough they were proved very wrong, and that story is coming up in the next few episodes. Anyway, having won this battle, and having occupied the northern portion of the Chola territory, Krishna marched south. He went all the way to Rameshwaram and erected a victory pillar over there. The erecting of a victory pillar is one of the best signals that a king has been there and ruled the land. And for the same reasons that things looked bleak for the Cholas, things looked great for the Rashtrakutas, and there was the feeling of the resurgence of the old glory. But while all this glory was being aggregated in the south, the northern territories had started to catch fire. It might be remembered that some of these territories, such as the Gurujara, Pratihara and the Malwa, had been the prized possessions of the Rashtrakutas. But these were powerful kingdoms, and it had always taken much time and commitment and a very strong hand to keep them in check. The downside of running a large empire necessarily composed of a collection of feudatories is that each one of the feudatories need to be protected without question when attacked, even if the feudatory had started the fight. Now, to do this requires massive infrastructure, a bottomless pit of trusted senior management, and constant attention. Krishna returned to Manyaketa probably around 960 AD and immediately prepared for his campaign north. Buttuga II had died by then, but his son Marasimha had taken his place as Krishna's staunch ally. Returning from the coronation of Marasimha, Krishna did not have an idle moment. He started his campaign and he marched through several territories of the north, re-establishing his position or putting out fires. Now, as with every moment in history, new players come into the reckoning, and in this case the new players were the Chandelas of Madhya Pradesh and an old ally but a new threat, the Paramaras of Malwa. Krishna III was a capable soldier and he was a loyal friend, but he wasn't a great manager, and his lack of statesmanship created a lot of problems for his successors. And speaking of loyal friend, he gave too much power to the Gangas and irritated the Paramaras, which was bad because he had not really fully subjugated them and they grew into a threat. Krishna had also carelessly made grants of key provinces to favored lieutenants, and one of these was Tailapa II, a Chalukya, and this would prove to be a huge and very, very costly mistake. When Krishna III died in early 967, it signaled the rapid sunset of the dynasty. Things started to come apart. Krishna was succeeded by his half-brother Kotiga, and during his time, by 972 AD, the Paramara king Harsha Siyaka attacked. Alarmed, Kotiga asked the Ganga king Marasimha to help him. But even before Marasimha arrived, Siyaka had stormed Manyaketa. He looted the treasury and even took copper-plate records from the archives. Marasimha soon reached the capital, and it said that he rescued it, but the truth is that Siyaka never intended to stay. It is unclear if Marasimha actually drove him out in a battle or simply harassed the retreating army. The sack of Manyaketa happened in 972, and Kotiga, already pretty old by then, didn't survive the disgrace for very long. His place on the throne was taken over by Karka II, but by this time it became clear that following Krishna III, there was no strength left in the Rashtrakuta Empire, and indeed, the sack of Manyaketa had done no good for their pride. Sometimes, a challenge or a disaster brings out the best in people, but almost always, weakness brings out the worst in people, and Karka, for all his ineptitude, or maybe because of it, earned the reputation of being petty and particularly nasty and vicious, and he had surrounded himself with people who were like him and encouraged him. On top of it, Karka had overridden the legitimate dynastic succession claim of Krishna IV, and this annoyed Marasimha, who distanced himself from Karka. All in all, Karka had alienated all the feudatories of the Rashtrakutas. He had upset other kingdoms like the Chedis, and even some factions within the palace were not supportive of Karka anymore because he had usurped the throne. Now, some of the feudatories had already started to look ahead to larger gains in the wake of the Rashtrakutas that now looked certain. Earlier, I had mentioned Krishna's mistake in encouraging some feudatories, such as when he granted Taradavadi to one of his closest allies, Tailapa II. Now, Taila was from the Chalukya family. Now, Tailapa II, or Taila, was then running a minor fief, or a small principality, of Bijapur. But he harbored ambitions of restoring the glory of the Chalukyas, his family's dynasty, which had been lost to the Rashtrakutas centuries earlier. Taila believed that he was a direct descendant of the Chalukyas of Vatapi. He had great military prowess, and this sense of lineage fueled his aspirations. Taila's wife was a Rashtrakuta princess, and his mother was a Chedi princess, the same dynasty that Karka had managed to upset. Taila had her support in his bid to reclaim the Deccan throne. Taila Chalukya saw an opportunity and he launched his offensive against Karka in 973 AD. The decisive battle, likely fought somewhere in northern Karnataka, was said to be fierce. Taila's own records admit that it was only after a very bloody conflict that he was able to claim victory and seize power. Karka fled the battle scene, but he went on to carve out a small little principality somewhere in the Sorab district where he ruled until 991 AD, but he still presumed to use imperial titles like Maharaja Raja. And after Karka's flight, Taila marched into the Rashtrakuta capital, Manyaketa. There was one more challenge for Taila to overcome. Krishna IV, who had been recognized, maybe only in name, as the last emperor of the Rashtrakutas, and Marasimha Ganga, his maternal uncle, challenged Taila, but they were decisively defeated. Upset by everything, both of them became Jain monks, and then they ended their life by starvation in a death ritual called Salekhana. Marasimha died in 975 and Indra IV in 982. And by 1973, Taila was the emperor of the third coming of the Chalukya dynasty, the Western Chalukyas. The fall of the Rashtrakuta Empire was nothing short of dramatic. Think about it. Only in 967 AD, Krishna III stood the undisputed master of the entire Deccan. By the end of 975, the mighty and glorious Rashtrakuta Empire was nothing more than dust, leaving behind only the echoes of its former glory. And much like the Pallavas before them, vanished from history, never to rise again. Coming up in the next episode, I will take a look at all the events in the same timeline as this episode, but inside the Ganga kingdom, and I will describe the sunset of one of the longest dynasties in the history of the world. And history takes a turn with the rise of the Western Chalukyas, the Hoysalas, and importantly, the mighty Cholas. All that coming up very soon. Meanwhile, stay tuned, stay dry, stay safe. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.